My stepmom changed the lock and kicked me out after my dad's funeral. She forgot my name was in the deed, so I cut the power, water, and gas. Then, I had the police escorted her out for trespassing. I'm 32 male, and my dad passed away 3 months ago from a sudden heart attack. He was only 58. Completely unexpected, and honestly the worst thing that's ever happened to me. We were close, like really close. After my mom died when I was 9, it was just me and him against the world for years. My mom's death hit us both hard. Cancer, the fast-moving kind that goes from diagnosis to funeral in 6 months. Dad was 35 at the time. Suddenly, a single father with a 9-year-old kid and no idea what he was doing. But he figured it out. He learned to cook more than just grilled cheese. He learned to sign permission slips and pack lunches and show up to parent-teacher conferences still wearing his work uniform because he came straight from the shop. Every Sunday morning, he'd make these terrible pancakes that were somehow burned on the outside and raw in the middle. We'd eat them anyway and pretend they were great. When I got older and learned to cook properly, I offered to take over Sunday pancakes. He looked almost offended, said those terrible pancakes were our tradition and I needed to respect the process. So we kept eating terrible pancakes every Sunday until I moved out at 24. He taught me how to shave when I was 14, even though I barely had peach fuzz. We stood in the bathroom mirror together and he showed me the proper angle, how to rinse the blade, how to handle the aftershave sting. He taught me how to change oil on my first car, a beat-up Honda Civic I bought for $800. We spent an entire Saturday in the driveway, him explaining every step while I did the actual work. Dad taught me how to file taxes the year I got my first real job. He sat me down at the kitchen table with all the forms and walked me through it line by line. No shortcuts, no quick version, the full proper way to do it. He said, a man who understands his taxes is a man who understands his money. But more than any specific skill, Dad taught me how to stand up for myself, how to look someone in the eye when they're trying to intimidate you, how to speak calmly when you want to yell, how to walk away from a fight that isn't worth having. Everything I know about being a man, about handling myself with dignity and quiet strength, I learned from watching him navigate life. Dad worked as a diesel mechanic for 35 years. Started at the bottom when he was 22, right out of technical school. Worked his way up from oil changes and tire rotations to engine rebuilds and electrical diagnostics. After 15 years, they made him shop foreman. He managed a crew of 8 guys, handled scheduling, dealt with difficult customers, and still got under the hood when they were short-staffed. He never called in sick unless he was literally dying. I remember one time he had the flu so bad he could barely stand, but he still went in for a half day because they had a fleet deadline. Came home at noon, collapsed on the couch, and slept for 14 hours straight. That was Dad. Work first always. Every paycheck he saved money. Not just a little bit. I'm talking serious saving. He tracked every expense in these little notebooks he kept in his truck. He'd write down gas prices, grocery costs, utility bills, everything. He knew exactly where every dollar went. Some people thought he was cheap. He wasn't cheap, he was intentional. When I was 12, he bought a house. Nothing massive or fancy, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, decent-sized backyard, quiet neighborhood where people actually knew each other's names. The mortgage was 30 years. He paid it off in 20. How'd he do it? Extra payments every single month. Tax refunds went straight to the principal. Bonuses from work went straight to the principal. He drove the same truck for 18 years because putting an extra $300 a month toward the house was more important than having a shiny new vehicle. The day he made that final payment, he took me to Sam's place for breakfast. Didn't make a big deal about it. Just said he'd finished paying off the house, and now we could focus on building my college fund. I was 22 at the time, already graduated and working, but he'd been setting aside money for years just in case I wanted to go back for a master's degree or something. He was so proud of that house. The lawn was always perfect. He'd mow it every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. Did the edges with a trimmer blew off the driveway? Neighbors used to joke that you could set your watch by his mowing schedule. He fixed everything himself. Leaky faucets, broken gutters, cracked tiles, squeaky hinges. He knew how to handle it all. Every neighbor knew his name. He'd help them jump their cars in winter, loan them tools, give advice on home repairs. When old Mrs. Henderson next door had a stroke, Dad mowed her lawn every week for 6 months until her son could move her into assisted living. Didn't ask for anything in return. Just did it because that's what neighbors do. Then 5 years ago, Dad met Brenda at some community fundraiser. The local fire department was doing their annual charity pancake breakfast. Brenda was working one of the booths selling raffle tickets. She was 41 at the time, worked as a receptionist at a dental office across town. Divorced once, no kids. She seemed nice enough at first. They exchanged numbers. He called her the next day. I was 27, living in my own apartment, working as a logistics coordinator for a regional shipping company. When Dad told me he'd met someone, I was genuinely happy for him. It had been almost 2 decades since Mom died. They dated for about 2 months before I met her. Dad invited us both to dinner at this Italian place. Brenda showed up in a nice dress, full makeup. She was polite, asked me about my job, thanked Dad for dinner. She played the part perfectly. Over the next 6 months, I saw her maybe 5 times. Always pleasant, always appropriate. I had no red flags. She just seemed like a normal woman who made my dad happy. They dated for 8 months before Dad proposed. He asked for my blessing. I gave it without hesitation. They got married 3 months later at the courthouse. Just family and a few close friends. Maybe 30 people total. Nothing fancy. Simple white dress, Dad's only suit. The whole thing probably cost less than $2,000. Brenda moved in the day after the wedding. That's when the changes started. New towels, decorative pillows, different curtains. Dad didn't seem to mind at first, but then she wanted to repaint the entire house. Dad's office had been dark blue for 20 years. She wanted it beige, the kitchen was white. She wanted it gray. Dad went along with it, bought the paint, did the work himself over several weekends. Then she started getting rid of stuff. Old furniture that had been there since I was a kid. Brenda said it was outdated. Dad bought new furniture. The part that really bothered me was when she found Mom's old things in the attic. Some photos, books, recipe cards, jewelry Dad had saved for me. Brenda said it made her uncomfortable having another woman's belongings in her home. Dad ended up moving the boxes to the garage to keep the peace. When I mentioned all these changes to Dad, he just shrugged and said marriage was about compromise. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't thrilled about it either. He was just trying to make it work. That was Dad's way. Avoid conflict where possible. Keep the peace. Make the best of situations. Brenda never worked another day after marrying Dad. She quit her job at the dental office exactly 2 months and 3 days into the marriage. I remember the exact timing because Dad mentioned it during breakfast. Said Brenda had decided to leave her job. The commute was too stressful. Apparently 40 minutes each way was just too much for her to handle. I asked what she was going to do instead. Dad said she was going to take some time to focus on the house, maybe look for something closer. I asked if they'd discussed the financial impact. He got this look on his face, said they'd talked about it and decided it was worth it for her mental health. Mental health. The woman worked a reception desk at a dental office, answered phones, scheduled appointments, filed paperwork, low stress as jobs go, but sure, the commute was destroying her mental health. Dad picked up extra overtime shifts to cover the lost income. He was already working 45 hours a week. Now he was pushing 55, sometimes 60. He'd come home exhausted, grab something to eat, and pass out on the couch by 9 p.m. Meanwhile, Brenda was fresh as a daisy because she'd spend her day doing whatever people who don't work do. I never saw her look for another job. Not once in 5 years. Oh, she'd mention it occasionally. Say she was keeping her options open. Say she was waiting for the right opportunity. Say she was networking with friends, but nothing ever materialized. She just settled into permanent unemployment like it was a legitimate life plan. Her daily routine, from what I could tell from Dad's comments, went something like this. Sleep until 9 or 10 a.m. Have coffee while watching morning talk shows. Maybe go shopping or meet a friend for lunch. Come home and watch more TV. Mess around on her phone for hours. That was it. That was her contribution to the household. Dad would come home most nights to dirty dishes in the sink, laundry piled up, floors that needed vacuuming. The bathroom hadn't been cleaned in who knows how long. She'd be sitting on the couch in her pajamas halfway through a reality show marathon, eating takeout she'd ordered with Dad's money. He never complained to her about it, not directly, but he'd mention things to me during our breakfasts. Say he'd been doing laundry at midnight because nothing was clean. Say he'd cleaned the kitchen at 11 p.m. because he couldn't stand looking at dirty dishes anymore. Say he'd vacuumed Sunday morning before I picked him up for breakfast. I tried talking to Dad about it, not aggressively. Just mentioned that maybe the division of labor seemed a bit uneven. He worked 60 hours a week at a physically demanding job. She worked 0 hours a week at absolutely nothing. Maybe she could handle the household stuff in return. Dad got defensive, said Brenda had her own way of doing things, said she was adjusting to married life, said I didn't understand what it was like because I wasn't married, said he appreciated my concern, but he had it handled. I tried again, maybe 6 months later. Same response, defensive, protective, making excuses. I realized then that Dad knew exactly what was happening. He wasn't blind. He wasn't dumb. He just didn't want to admit he'd made a mistake. Didn't want to admit he'd chosen poorly. Didn't want to be alone again. That broke my heart more than anything. My dad, this strong man who taught me to stand up for myself, was letting himself be taken advantage of just to avoid going back to an empty house every night. He'd rather work himself into an early grave than admit his marriage was a bad deal. But despite everything with Brenda, Dad and I still had our weekly breakfast every Saturday morning. Just the two of us at this little diner called Sam's Place that he'd been going to for 30 years. Same booth every time. Back left corner window view. Sam retired about 10 years ago, but his daughter kept the place running. She knew Dad's order by heart. 2 eggs over easy wheat toast, hash browns, black coffee. Never changed. I'd usually get the Western omelet. We'd sit there for an hour, sometimes 2, talk about work. I'd tell him about shipping logistics drama. Difficult customers, my boss who couldn't make a decision to save his life. He'd tell me about engine problems he'd solved, younger mechanics he was training, customers who thought they knew more than him. We'd talk about sports, both huge football fans. We'd argue about draft picks and coaching decisions and whether our team had any shot at making the playoffs. We'd make predictions, keep track of who'd been right more often. Loser bought breakfast next week. Sometimes we wouldn't talk much at all, just sit there reading the newspaper, drinking coffee, existing in comfortable silence. Those mornings were sacred. They reminded me that underneath all the Brenda drama, my real dad was still in there. The guy who taught me to throw a football. The guy who stayed up all night with me when I had the flu in 8th grade. The guy who drove 6 hours to help me move into my first apartment even though his back was killing him. Brenda never came to these breakfasts. Said she wasn't a morning person. Couldn't possibly function before 10 a.m. Which was fine with me. Those mornings were ours, father and son. The way it had been for 23 years before she came along. I never spoke badly about Brenda during these breakfasts. Never criticized her directly. Dad didn't need me piling on when he was clearly aware of the situation. But I'd ask how he was doing, how he was feeling, if he was happy. He'd always say he was fine, that everything was fine, that I shouldn't worry about him. But I could see the tiredness in his eyes that wasn't there 5 years ago. Could see him moving a little slower, looking a little older than he should at 58. The overtime was grinding him down. The lack of support at home was wearing on him. But he'd chosen this path, and he wasn't the type to complain or back out. About 2 years into their marriage, Dad did something smart, something that would end up saving my inheritance and honoring his true wishes. He updated his will. It was a Saturday morning, late September. We'd just finished breakfast at Sam's place. I was getting ready to leave when Dad asked if I had an extra hour. Said he wanted to talk to me about something important. My stomach dropped. Important talks with Dad usually meant bad news. Health problems, job troubles, marriage issues. We sat back down. Dad ordered another coffee. He pulled out a manila folder from his truck and slid it across the table. Inside were documents from an estate planning lawyer's office. A new will trust documents beneficiary forms. He explained everything methodically. The way he explained how to change brake pads or file taxes step by step, clear and detailed. The house would go to me. Full ownership, no strings attached. Brenda would have the right to live there for 6 months after his death to give her time to figure things out. But after that, the property was mine to do with as I wanted. She couldn't sell it, couldn't mortgage it, couldn't claim any ownership stake. His truck, a 2015 Ford F-150 he'd bought new and maintained perfectly, would go to me. He knew I'd take care of it the way he did. His retirement accounts built up over 35 years of steady contributions and careful investing would go to me. He had about $340,000 in his 401k. Not a fortune, but a solid nest egg for someone who'd never made more than $70,000 a year. His life insurance policy, a $200,000 term policy he'd kept since I was born, would be split. Brenda would get $25,000 as a one-time payment to help her get on her feet. The remaining $175,000 would go to me. He'd also set up a small checking account with about $15,000 that would go directly to me for estate expenses, funeral costs, probate fees, lawyer fees, whatever was needed to handle everything properly. The most important part, he named me as the executive of his estate. Full authority to manage everything, distribute assets according to the will, pay off any remaining debts, handle all the paperwork, close accounts, transfer titles, everything. I asked him why he was doing this now. Why the sudden urgency? He was only 56, healthy as far as I knew. No major health problems. Dad took a long drink of his coffee, stared out the window for a minute, then looked me straight in the eye. Said he'd been thinking about mortality a lot lately. Guys he worked with were having heart attacks, getting diagnosed with cancer, dropping dead with no warning. He'd seen 3 coworkers die in the past year, made him realize he needed to get his affairs in order. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said Brenda was his companion, his wife, and he cared about her. But I was his son, his blood, his legacy. Everything he'd built in his life was meant to go to me. The house he'd paid off through decades of hard work, the savings he'd accumulated through careful planning, the life insurance he'd paid premiums on for 32 years. He said Brenda would be taken care of with the $25,000. That was more than generous for someone who'd been in his life for only 2 years and contributed nothing financially to the household. She could use that money to start fresh, get an apartment, build her own life. But everything else was mine because I'd earned it. Not through money, but through being his son. Through all the years, it was just us against the world. Through every Sunday pancake, every Saturday breakfast, every life lesson, every shared memory, I was his real family. Everything else was just temporary companionship. I got emotional right there in the booth, tried to play it off, but my eyes were wet. Dad reached across the table and grabbed my shoulder. Said he was proud of me. Proud of the man I'd become. Proud that I'd turned out honest and strong and capable. Said he trusted me to handle his estate properly when the time came. I asked if Brenda knew about any of this. He said no. Said it would just cause unnecessary drama and fighting while he was alive. He'd rather avoid that conflict and deal with it when it actually mattered. He asked me to keep it quiet, not tell anyone, not mention it to Brenda if we ever talked, just keep the information to myself until it was needed. I agreed. It was his decision to make his estate, to plan his life, to live how he saw fit. We went to the lawyer's office the following Tuesday. A guy named Robert Chen, who specialized in estate planning, nice office professional staff, clearly knew his stuff. We spent 2 hours going over everything, making sure every document was proper, every signature was witnessed, every form was notarized. Robert explained Washington state law regarding estates, wills, and spousal rights. Confirmed that Dad's approach was completely legal. A spouse can't automatically claim everything just because they're married. The deceased's will takes precedence as long as it's properly executed and doesn't violate specific legal protections. In Washington, a surviving spouse is entitled to a certain percentage of community property. But Dad's house was purchased before the marriage. His retirement accounts were built before the marriage. The truck was purchased before the marriage. These were separate property, not community property. Therefore, he could leave them to whoever he wanted. The life insurance policy was a bit different since he'd paid some premiums during the marriage, but because he was leaving Brenda the $25,000, no court would see that as him leaving her destitute. It was a reasonable provision for a spouse of 2 years. Robert filed everything with the county. Original will went into Dad's fire safe at home. I got certified copies of everything. The estate plan was official and legally binding. Dad made one more request before we left the lawyer's office. He asked Robert to include a letter of instruction with the will. Not legally binding, just a personal message explaining his decisions in case there were questions or challenges after his death. The letter explained that he loved Brenda and hoped the money he left her would help her build a good life. But his primary responsibility was to his son, his flesh and blood, the person who'd been there through everything. He hoped everyone would respect his wishes and handle the transition peacefully. We left the lawyer's office and went to lunch. Didn't talk about the will anymore, just had burgers and talked about football. Dad seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. He'd done his duty taking care of the future, protected what mattered most. That conversation happened 3 years before he died. During those 3 years, nothing changed in terms of his and Brenda's relationship. She still didn't work, still didn't clean, still treated his house like her personal shopping mall to redecorate whenever she felt like it. And Dad still worked overtime to fund her lifestyle while slowly wearing himself down. But I had peace of mind, knowing that when the time came, everything would be handled properly. Dad's wishes would be honored. His life's work would go to the person he actually wanted to have it. I never told a single person about the will. Not my girlfriend at the time, not my close friends, nobody. Dad trusted me with that secret and I kept it locked down. The heart attack happened on a Tuesday morning. Dad was at the shop working on some fleet truck when he just collapsed. Coworkers called 911 immediately. He was dead before the ambulance got there. Massive coronary event. The doctor said he probably didn't feel much, that it was quick small comfort when you just lost your hero. I got the call at work around 10:30 a.m. It was Brenda crying, barely coherent. She told me Dad was gone. I left work immediately, drove to the hospital, and spent the next hour in complete shock in the waiting room. Brenda was there playing the grieving widow role to perfection, crying loudly, hugging people, making a scene. Meanwhile, I just sat there numb, trying to process that my father was actually gone. The funeral was 3 days later. Big turnout. Dad knew a lot of people from work, the neighborhood, his mechanic days. Brenda wore black from head to toe. Had this dramatic veil thing going on. Sobbed through the entire service. Everyone kept telling her how strong she was being. Meanwhile, I gave the eulogy and shook about 200 hands while feeling completely hollow inside. After the funeral, I took a week off work to handle estate stuff. This is where things got interesting. I called Brenda the day after the funeral to schedule a time to go through Dad's papers and start the probate process. She told me not to worry about it, that she'd handle everything, and I should just focus on grieving. Red flag number 1. I explained that I was the executive and legally needed to be involved. She got quiet for a second, then said Dad never mentioned anything about that to her. I told her we could go through the will together and figure everything out. She said that sounded fine and we could meet at the house on Friday. Friday came. I showed up at the house at 2 p.m. like we agreed. I had my copies of the will, the estate documents, everything organized in a folder. I rang the doorbell. No answer. I rang again. Nothing. I called Brenda's cell, straight to voicemail. I tried the door. Locked. I tried my key. Didn't work. She changed the locks. I stood there for a solid minute just staring at my key in my hand, trying to process what was happening. This woman had changed the locks on my dead father's house less than a week after his funeral. The house that I legally owned according to his will, the house where I grew up. She locked me out of my own property. I called her again, voicemail. I texted her, no response. I walked around the house checking windows. Everything was locked tight. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. She was just ignoring me. I sat in my truck in the driveway for about 20 minutes running through my options. I could call the police, but without being able to prove ownership right now, that might not go anywhere. I could get a lawyer involved, but that would take time and money. Or I could handle this myself. See, what Brenda forgot in her little power play was that I wasn't just some random person, I was the executive. I had legal authority over this estate, and more importantly, I had copies of every important document, including the deed to the house, all the utility account information, and access to Dad's financial accounts. Since I was listed as a beneficiary and executive, I drove home and spent the evening making a plan. Dad taught me that when someone disrespects you, you don't get mad. You get methodical. You think it through and you handle it properly. First thing Saturday morning, I went to the county clerk's office, brought my copy of Dad's death certificate, the will, my executive documents, and my ID, filed everything official, got certified copies made. The clerk was super helpful, explained the probate process, and confirmed that yes, I was legally the executive and yes, the will was valid and properly filed. Then I called Dad's estate lawyer, left a message explaining the situation. He called back Monday morning, said what Brenda did was potentially illegal depending on how we wanted to play it, and that we should schedule a meeting to discuss options. We set it for Wednesday, but I wasn't waiting until Wednesday to make my move. Monday afternoon, I started making phone calls. First call was to the electric company, explained I was the executive of the estate, provided all my documentation via email, and requested that service to the property be disconnected due to non-payment authorization. See, Brenda wasn't on the account. Dad's name was on everything, and as executive, I had authority to make changes. The rep was sympathetic, verified everything, and scheduled disconnection for Wednesday morning. Second call was to the water company. Same process, provided documentation, explained the situation, requested disconnection. They were actually more helpful than the electric company. Said they could have someone out there Tuesday afternoon. Third call was to the gas company. At this point, I had the routine down. Documentation sent, executive authority verified, disconnection scheduled for Tuesday morning. I want to be clear here. I wasn't doing this to be petty. I was doing this because Brenda had locked me out of my own property and refused to communicate. She wanted to play games. Fine, but she forgot that I held all the cards. Tuesday morning came and went. Gas disconnected. Tuesday afternoon, water disconnected. I waited for my phone to ring. Nothing. Not a single call or text from Brenda. She was either the most stubborn person on the planet, or she genuinely thought she could outlast me somehow. Wednesday morning, electric disconnected. Finally, around 2 p.m., my phone rang. Brenda. I let it go to voicemail. She called again immediately. Voicemail again. Then she started texting. The power is out. Why is the water not working? Did you do this? Call me right now. This is your father's house. You have no right. I didn't respond. Just screenshot every message and forwarded them to the estate lawyer. He called me an hour later laughing. Said Brenda had also called him threatening legal action against me. He told her that she was currently occupying property she had no legal claim to, that I was the legal owner as per the will, and that if she didn't vacate immediately, we'd pursue trespassing charges. Apparently, Brenda lost her mind, started screaming about how Dad would never do this to her, how she was his wife, how she had rights. The lawyer very calmly explained that Washington state law was clear on this matter, that the will superseded marriage in terms of property distribution, and that she had approximately zero legal standing. He gave her until Friday at noon to vacate the property peacefully, or we'd involve law enforcement. Thursday, my phone blew up. 15 calls from Brenda, dozens of texts. She tried every angle, crying and apologizing, saying she was scared and confused, saying I was being cruel, saying Dad wouldn't want this, saying we could work something out, saying she'd take me to court, saying her lawyer said I was breaking the law. Back and forth between victim and aggressor, like she couldn't decide which role worked better. I responded to exactly one text, sent her a photo of the will, highlighted the part where I inherited everything and the part where she had 6 months to vacate, and wrote, "You've had 6 days. You changed the locks. You refused to communicate. You're trespassing on my property. You have until Friday at noon." She tried calling again. I blocked her number. Friday morning, I met with the estate lawyer at 9 a.m. We went over everything. He confirmed I had done everything by the book. The utility disconnections were legal since I was the executive and property owner. Brenda's lock change was actually illegal, since she altered property she didn't own without permission. We had grounds for trespassing charges if she didn't leave voluntarily. At 11 a.m., I drove to the house, brought the lawyer with me, also brought 2 police officers. I'd called the non-emergency line Thursday evening, explained the situation, provided all my documentation ahead of time. The dispatcher said they'd send officers to keep the peace during the eviction. We all pulled up to the house at 11:45 a.m. Brenda's car was in the driveway. The officers knocked on the door. No answer. They knocked again, announced themselves as police. The door opened. Brenda looked terrible. Hair messy, no makeup, wearing the same clothes I'd seen her in at the funeral. The house behind her was dark. No lights, no power, 3 days without utilities. She looked at me with pure hatred. The officers were professional. Explained that she needed to vacate the property immediately, that this was a civil matter, but she was currently trespassing, and that if she didn't leave peacefully, they'd have to arrest her. They showed her all my documentation, the will, the executive paperwork, the property deed, everything. Brenda tried arguing, said I was lying, said the will was fake, said Dad promised her the house. The officers weren't interested. They'd already verified everything with the county. They gave her a choice. Leave now with whatever she could carry, or leave in handcuffs and get her stuff later. She started crying, real tears this time, not the performative funeral crying. She looked at me like I was supposed to feel sorry for her, like I was the bad guy in this situation. I just stared back completely blank. Dad's words echoed in my head. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. The lawyer stepped forward and handed her an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $25,000, the amount Dad had left her in the will. He explained that this fulfilled the estate's obligation to her, that she had 30 days to retrieve her personal belongings with proper notice, and that any items left after 30 days would be considered abandoned. Brenda took the envelope, looked at the check, and something in her just broke. She stopped crying, stopped arguing, just kind of deflated. She grabbed her purse and her phone charger and walked out the door. Didn't say a word, got in her car and drove away. The officers asked if I wanted them to help me change the locks. I said I'd already called a locksmith who was on his way. They took a final report, gave me a case number for my records, and left. The whole thing took maybe 40 minutes. The locksmith showed up 20 minutes later, changed every lock in the house. Front door, back door, garage side entrance, gave me 5 new keys. I walked through the house after he left, just taking it all in. The place was a mess. Brenda had clearly been living like a raccoon for the past 3 days. Dirty dishes everywhere, trash overflowing. The refrigerator was starting to smell since the power had been out for 2 days. But underneath all of that, I could still see my dad's house, the place where I grew up, the place he'd worked so hard to pay off and maintain. I spent the entire weekend cleaning, called the utility companies, got everything turned back on, under my name, threw out all the food in the fridge, cleaned every surface, opened every window to air, the place out, went through Dad's belongings, his clothes, his tools, his personal items. I cried more that weekend than I had since the funeral. I found Dad's fire safe in his closet. Inside was the original will, his passport, the deed to the house, and a letter addressed to me. The letter was dated from 2 weeks before he died. It said if I was reading this, it meant he was gone and I was handling his estate. He wrote that he was proud of me, that he trusted me to do the right thing, and that he hoped I'd keep the house and remember all the good times we had there. He also wrote about Brenda, said he knew the marriage wasn't perfect, that he wasn't blind to her faults, but that he'd chosen companionship over loneliness and didn't regret it. He hoped she'd be taken care of with the money he left her, but he knew she wasn't responsible enough to manage property or significant assets. That's why everything went to me, because he trusted me because I was his son. I sat on the floor of his bedroom, reading that letter probably 10 times. Then I put it back in the safe for keeping. Over the next few weeks, I handled all the probate stuff. It took about 2 months total to get everything finalized. The house officially transferred to me. Dad's retirement accounts got distributed, life insurance paid out, everything went exactly according to the will. Brenda tried contacting me a few more times over the next couple weeks, left voicemails saying she needed more time to get her stuff, sent texts asking if we could talk, even tried showing up at my work once, but security didn't let her past the front desk. I had the lawyer handle all communication. We scheduled 3 separate appointments for her to retrieve her belongings. She showed up to one of them with her sister, grabbed some clothes and personal items, spent maybe 30 minutes in the house and left. The other 2 appointments she just didn't show up for. Everything else she left behind. Furniture she'd bought, decorations, kitchen stuff, clothes in the closet. I ended up donating after the 30-day window closed, called a local charity, they sent a truck, took everything. I kept receipts for the tax deduction. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved in with her sister 2 towns over. Apparently told everyone I'd stolen her house and left her homeless. Some people believed her. Most people who actually knew Dad didn't buy it for a second. I decided to keep Dad's house. Took about 3 months to fully move in and make it mine. Got rid of all of Brenda's changes, repainted walls back to Dad's colors, put his favorite recliner back in the living room, hung up old family photos, turned it back into the home I remembered. I still live here now 6 months later. Every morning I have coffee in the kitchen where Dad taught me how to scramble eggs. Every evening I sit on the back porch where we used to watch football games. The house is paid off, so my only expenses are utilities and property tax. I'm able to save a ton of money now. Some people might think what I did to Brenda was harsh, that cutting off utilities was extreme, that I should have been more understanding. But she showed her true colors the second Dad died, changed the locks and tried to steal what wasn't hers. Dad taught me to stand up for myself, to handle my business properly. That's exactly what I did. I followed the law. I executed his will. I protected what he worked his entire life to build. If Brenda had approached this differently, maybe I would have given her more time, but she made her choice. She chose to be greedy. She chose to dishonor Dad's memory. So I responded the only way that made sense. Swift, legal, and final. The last time I saw Brenda was about 2 months ago at the grocery store. She saw me, turned white, and literally abandoned her cart. Just left the store. I finished my shopping, went home, and started planning my next moves. Week 1 after the eviction, I had a professional cleaning crew come through. The place was disgusting. They deep cleaned everything. Cost me $600, but it was worth it. Week 2. I started moving my stuff in, brought over furniture, piece by piece, started setting up each room the way I wanted it. Week 3, I went through all of Dad's belongings kept. What mattered, his work boots, favorite shirts, his tools, the photo albums donated, the rest found his fire safe in the bedroom closet. Inside was the original will, the house deed, and that letter. Also found about $3,000 in cash, Dad's emergency fund. I used it to cover moving expenses. By week 6, the house was fully mine, everything transferred, all accounts closed, all paperwork filed. The probate wrapped up faster than expected. The lawyer said it was one of the cleanest estates he'd handled in years. I kept Dad's truck with 140,000 miles that ran perfectly. Sold my old sedan and started driving it daily. The retirement money, about $340,000 after taxes, I rolled into my own accounts. Didn't touch it. The life insurance money. $175,000 I used to pay off my student loans, build an emergency fund, and invest the rest. 2 months after moving in, I got a letter from Brenda's lawyer threatening to contest the will, claiming Dad promised her the house verbally, claiming she was entitled to more. I forwarded everything to my estate lawyer. He sent back a response that basically said, "Bring it on," never heard from her lawyer again. 3 months in, I ran into one of Brenda's friends at the hardware store, a woman named Patricia, who wanted to know my side of the story. Said Brenda had been telling everyone I'd forged the will. I told her the truth. Dad made his will 3 years before he died with a professional lawyer. Everything was legal and documented. If Brenda told people otherwise, that was her problem. 4 months in, I started making real improvements. Fixed the leaky faucet. Dad never got around to replacing the old water heater. Upgraded the electrical panel in the garage. I also started hosting barbecues like Dad used to. Had the neighbors over. They ate burgers and told stories about him. Felt good keeping his memory alive that way. 5 months in, Mrs. Patterson said she'd seen Brenda drive by the house twice that week. I installed a security camera system just in case she tried anything stupid. 6 months after Dad's death, I had the house exactly how I wanted it. My stuff mixed with his. New improvements mixed with old memories. I still go to Sam's place every Saturday morning. Same booth, Western omelets, read the newspaper. Sometimes I imagine Dad sitting across from me. The house is worth about $420,000. No mortgage. Combined with everything else, Dad left me close to $1 million in total assets. Not bad for a diesel mechanic who never made more than $70,000 a year. I could sell tomorrow and pocket the cash, but I won't. This house represents everything Dad worked for. I'm keeping it and maintaining it the way he did. Last I heard, Brenda's working retail for minimum wage, living with her sister. The 25 grand is probably gone. Meanwhile, I'm living mortgage-free in a paid-off house, building wealth and honoring my father's memory every day. Dad taught me, you don't get mad, you get methodical, you protect what's yours. That's exactly what I did.